This hour on I-24 News, from violence on the border to a war of words, the aftermath of the deadly confrontation in Gaza.
We'll be coming out of Syria like very soon. Let the other people take care of it now.
Backlash over President Trump's Syria policy, why one Republican senator says it would be a big mistake. Plus, a deal on African migrants called off, why Israel's prime minister backed away from the compromise. And China fires back, the new tariffs on U.S. exports, and why it sent stocks tumbling today.
From the I-24 News Studios in Times Square in New York, this is Clear Cut with Michelle McCory.
Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Tal Heinrich in for Michelle today. We begin on the Israeli border with Gaza, where tensions are still high tonight. Both sides are reeling from the worst violence to strike the border since the 2014 war. At least 18 Palestinians are dead since clashes broke out Friday. And out of the violence has come a war of words, pitting Israel against its Arab neighbors. The strongest language came from the president of Turkey, Erdogan.
Hey, Netanyahu, we don't have the shame of invading. You are an invader. You are occupying those lands as an invader. At the same time, you are a terrorist.
And Prime Minister Netanyahu fired back on Twitter, saying the most moral army in the world will not be lectured to on morality from someone who for years has been bombing civilians indiscriminately. Today it was a much calmer scene along the border. Our senior defense correspondent Chai Ben-Ari has more.
Yes, well, protests did continue today on the Israel-Gaza border, but on a much smaller scale than what we saw last Friday. We are positioned here across from one of the camps that was erected already a few days ago on the Gazan side, with tents and provisions brought in for the protesters. Today there were only a few hundred gathered there, as opposed to thousands back on Friday. In terms of violence, we did see some tear gas being used and perhaps some sporadic clashes with some of the protesters there and IDF forces on the Israeli side. We could hear perhaps some gunshots, but apparently those were warning shots from what we gather into the air. We did not get any substantial reports of injuries inside the Gaza Strip as a result of this today. This could pick up again this Friday again when we are expected to see more people gather at these locations. There were at least 6 of these back on Friday. In terms of what happens on Fridays, you have less people going to work. They're more free to come and demonstrate, and it could get very violent again indeed. We expect this general situation of heightened tension on the Israel-Gaza border to last until at least mid-May. So far, the IDF preparing for another round of more intense clashes coming up this Friday.
And to further discuss the clashes on Israel's southern border, let's bring in my panel here. Israeli journalist Judy Shalom Nir Moses, thank you for coming here. And Thane Rosenbaum, a Middle East analyst. Very good to have both of you here. And happy Passover, I should also say. The numbers... We're talking about 18 Palestinians killed. The numbers of injured people is still very much in dispute. It differs if you're looking about the IDF talking about dozens of injured people, or the the Palestinian Health Ministry talking about more than 1,000. Do you think that Israel used excessive force along the border on Friday?
I think it's always amazing that they kill as few as they do, given what they're exposed to. Look, of the 18 people or 16 people who were killed, 10 of whom were people who were operatives with terrorist organizations, either Hamas or some other Gaza entity. These were not people there who were engaged in nonviolent passive resistance. They were there to incite violence. You know, the Hamas commander, they have a recording of him essentially inciting his fighters to say, go and eat the livers of the IDF. That's just not what Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi had in mind. And so, if Israel is firing back at people who are using machine guns or Molotov cocktails or burning tires and rolling them through fences, that's what they have to do to defend their homeland.
Judy, you're an Israeli journalist. You've been here in the U.S. in the days following the clashes along the border. And on one hand, you see the United States standing by Israel at the United Nations, blocking this draft resolution to condemn Israel. On the other hand, you see responses like the one from Senator Bernie Sanders saying that the killing of Palestinian demonstrators by Israeli forces in Gaza is tragic.
Tragic? What tragic about killing terrorists? The 10 people that were killed, as my friend said, they are terrorists. They are killers. They are murderers. I think it's very good, the fact that we killed them, that our army killed them, it's very, very good. Any army in the world that defends its country has to kill people who is coming to kill them, you know. I don't understand all these talkings and thoughts. I want to see another country that people are trying to attack her or kill her people and sitting quiet and don't do, and waiting for them to kill them and do nothing. So those 10 people that were killed, they deserve to die. And I think if a terrorist or a killer or a drug dealer is doing things like this, I mean, he has to be punished.
Do you understand the calls to investigate it more specifically? Because even the IDF says most of the Palestinians that were killed, not all of them, most of them were engaged in terror activities, not all of them.
11 of 17. 11 of 17 were terrorists. And the others, you know, when you do...
What about the other 6?
What is happening now, that the Hamas is willing to sacrifice those people, you know? They know that we can't sit down and be quiet and do nothing when they're trying to attack our borders, you know? It's funny that it's so hypocrite to react this way, because the Hamas, I think their policy, they know we are going to sacrifice some of our people for this matter, that the world will speak about us. You know, what's bothering me is nobody's speaking about the big amounts of money that the Hamas is getting, that Abu Mazen is getting, and they're giving it, I don't know to whom. It disappears, you know. I don't know why the world is not investigating where the money is going. I think this is more interesting than to do all of this demonstration. I mean, it's difficult for us because we look like the strong partner in this thing, but they're getting so much money and it disappears. So, where is it? Where does the money go?
To your point, Judy, Thane, Israel is always going to lose the PR war because of images coming from the Gaza border. But do you not see the need to investigate?
Of course. And Israel always undertakes. This is a free society with the rule of law, and they always, the IDF, always undertakes an investigation of the outcome. But that's what I said before, and I said I'm always amazed that 11 out of 17 actually were related to terror-related activities. That's extraordinary. Like, they're not firing at civilians. They're trying to kill the people who are trying to kill them. Look, Hamas has long perfected a civilian death strategy. They know about human shields, which is barbarism. That's what the world should be condemning. The barbarism of human shields and developing a system where you continue to embed your fighters among civilians. And that strategy is a war crime. That strategy is against the Geneva Convention. That strategy is something that the world doesn't condemn. And instead, the optics, which is your point, is to say, well, what about those 6? I mean, when I hear you say that, I think, God, you know, no one asks any other country in the world, what about those 6? No, nobody would ever ask that question. They would say...
You're saying if it was any other Western country but Israel, we wouldn't have been sitting here now having this discussion.
What would it be? Would we prefer it if they had done nothing? The fence would have been completely pushed in. They would have burned the fence, and then Israel would have been in a situation where they would have to kill thousands.
Try to imagine that the whole situation is because Gaza is in a very, very difficult economic situation, right? That's why they're doing it. But try to imagine that 687 million of their money, of the shekels, are going to terrorists' family. 687 million shekel are going to prisoners, to people that are getting this amount because they killed Jews. It's normal? Is it reasonable? Bring the money to the people in Gaza. Help them to build factories, do things for them. Don't give it to people who is killing people.
Just briefly, to Judy's point, Mahmoud Abbas, Palestinian president, he did accuse Israel. He did announce a day of mourning. He did not deliver any kind of medical or financial assistance to Gaza. What does it mean? How do you read his response to the clash?
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think that we're forgetting the fact that that Hamas and Gaza has had a deteriorating situation, largely because of the ongoing infighting between Fatah and Hamas.
Exactly.
So this, again, you know, so much of the pain of Palestinians is self-inflicted. I mean, we can speak about this all day. It's an endless example. Fatah has no control over Hamas, and they're trying to squeeze those. And so the deteriorating conditions in Gaza actually led to this protest. And of course, yes, he has a day of mourning because he wants to, again, pinpoint Israel as being the aggressor, but he has no interest in taking care of his people. He has no interest in relieving the suffering of the Palestinians.
Because the people are victims there. You know, Abbas now, he stopped money because he has a fight with the Hamas now. He's stopping help from like Arab country that wants to give money to the people of Gaza. He doesn't let them do it, you know. He stopped so many things because of his fight with the Hamas. And who is the victims? Only the people of Gaza. And instead of giving them the money and helping them to build factories and working places, they're trying to persuade them to hate Israel, to fight against Israel. You know, this is so... if I could speak to the people in Gaza, if I could come and talk to them, look them in the eyes and tell them, guys, it's not, we are not the enemy. The enemy is your people. The Hamas is the enemy. The Abu Mazen is the enemy. They have the money. They have the ability to bring you factories, to bring you prosperity, but they stop because they want you to be their shields. And this is frustrating, really.
Well, maybe some of them were watching I-24.
Of course they do.
Let's hope.
Thane, Judy, thank you so much for this fascinating discussion. And still ahead here on Clear Cut, the U.S. in Syria. The president says America is getting out as we learn more about the death of a soldier in the embattled country. Plus, victory for Sisi. The Egyptian president wins another term, what it means for the country and the region. And remembering a South African icon, a nation mourns the loss of Winnie Mandela. Welcome back. We're learning more about the deaths of an American and a British soldier killed in a bomb blast last week in Syria. The Pentagon says they were on a classified mission to kill or capture a known ISIS member. The Pentagon spokesman confirms the mission, but is releasing few other details. The dead soldiers are identified as Master Sergeant Jonathan Dunbar and British Sergeant Matt Tunroy. For more, let's bring in senior diplomatic correspondent Nina Larson in Washington. Nina, these soldiers were on a covert mission to kill or capture a known ISIS member, according to the Pentagon. Do we know who they were targeting?
Oh, no, we don't, Tal. This was a very sensitive, classified mission. But I did speak with a U.S. official earlier today who has knowledge of these kind of activities that the U.S. is engaged in Syria. And he said that the U.S. is acting under the assumption that ISIS leader al-Baghdadi is still alive and in Syria. We don't know if he was the target of this particular mission, but he very possibly is the target of similar missions in Syria. And what this does show is how heavily engaged the United States is still against ISIS in Syria.
And this, Nina, even though President Trump says the opposite, at least this is what he said in Ohio on Thursday. So will the U.S. leave Syria soon or not?
Well, it doesn't really look like it. So the president might have been appealing to his domestic audience a few days ago, Tal. And his comments have drawn some immediate criticism from leading Republicans. Let's take a listen to what Senator Lindsey Graham said earlier today.
It'd be the single worst decision the president could make. I've seen this movie before when Obama did the same thing in Iraq and quite frankly gave Assad a pass in Syria when he had him on the ropes. We got ISIL on the ropes. You don't let him off the ropes, remove American soldiers.
Those comments yesterday from Senator Lindsey Graham, who's on the Armed Services Committee in the Senate. Also, comments over the weekend in Time magazine from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, who is still visiting the United States. And he also contradicted President Trump, Tal, saying that, in his view, U.S. troops should stay longer term in Syria.
Nina Larson, thank you. And joining me now is retired Lieutenant Colonel Hal Kempfer of the Marine Corps Reserve and founder and CEO of KIPP, a military strategy consulting group. Hal, always good to have you on the show. In a controversial statement, the president announced in Ohio on Thursday that the U.S. would be coming out of Syria like very soon. You're familiar with the mission and the situation on the ground there. Would it be wise, in your opinion, to pull out of Syria soon?
Tal, I think it would be a mistake to pull out of Syria right now. We do have ISIS on the run, but ISIS is not done for. And as this mission where we just, we took losses shows, we have high-value targets out there. I don't know if that was al-Baghdadi that they were trying to get, but there are high-value targets that we still have to go after. Also, we have to keep ISIS from reconstituting. You know, we learned a lot of lessons from 2011 in Iraq, and we don't want to have to learn them again in Syria.
So you're basically taking the stance of Senator Lindsey Graham, but I want to ask you this. The U.S. troops will not stay on Syrian soil forever, right? So how do you know when is the right time to pull out? When the Russians pull out, when ISIS is defeated? What's your opinion?
Well, generally speaking, we say when the conditions are set and we've hit certain benchmarks, if you will, that set the stage for withdrawal. But things change over time. The situation on the ground changes. The participants change. Where they stand changes. We're going to be looking at what the Russians are doing. We're going to be looking very closely at what the Turks are doing. We don't want to see the Kurds left in a perilous situation where they're unable to defend themselves. We also don't want to withdraw and leave a situation where ISIS or something like it or another affiliate group that's just as dangerous could suddenly reconstitute and become another threat. So there's a lot of things that have to happen before you're going to see a complete withdrawal. Now, in the coming months, could we see a partial withdrawal of some forces? That's very possible, but again, the conditions have to be set.
What do you make of the fact that the president didn't seem to be in line with the Pentagon or with military commanders on this? And he basically caught them off guard with this announcement.
I think it caught everybody off guard with this announcement. And I think it was one of those things where, the president likes to say things in these rallies where he says some things that are kind of off the cuff. And he may have been expressing something that was a long-term vision, which is true. We don't want to be in Syria forever, and we have made substantial gains. That's not necessarily indicating a major change of policy, and I really listen much closer to what Secretary Mattis would be saying about our forces on the ground, because I know General Mattis. I had the privilege of working for General Mattis, and I can tell you that whatever he says is a very well thought out, very well planned strategic move, and I would listen very close there.
I want to ask you about the spending bill that was signed about a week and a half ago, because if there's one thing that the president does like about it, it's the increase in defense funding, the greatest one in the past 15 years. Do you think it's necessary?
Well, there was a lot of capital investment that needed to be done in our military forces. If you look at aircraft, if you look at our ships afloat, there was just a lot of things that had to be done, even things that get down to what weapons our troops are carrying in the field, and they all cost a lot of money. These investments will pay long-term dividends. There will always be a lot of discussion back and forth. Do we need to buy one carrier now or two carriers? Do we need to invest in this type of aircraft now? Should we hold off, look at another aircraft? These are all things that are discussed within the Pentagon. It's more of an art than a science at times, but there definitely need to be investment. And frankly, a lot of our planes and other major infrastructures a little bit worn out after over 15 years at war.
Well, at least we know that the president and the Pentagon are in line on this. Hal Kempfer, thank you.
Thank you, Tal.
In Egypt, as expected, the country's president won re-election in a landslide. I-24 News' Mohammed El Qasim reports.
It's official. The results are in. To no one's surprise, Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi won a second term with a landslide 97% of the vote. Sisi ran virtually unopposed. The other serious candidates were either arrested or intimidated. Mustafa Musa, who has widely been dismissed as a dummy candidate, got less than 3%. Despite a huge push by Sisi's supporters to get as many Egyptians as possible to polling stations, the turnout was only 41%, 6% less than in 2014.
The number of people who voted locally and internationally is 24,254,152, comprising 41.5% of the electorate.
The low turnout is considered a setback by many. Sisi didn't get the mandate he was aiming for, putting his legitimacy in doubt. Sisi himself saw this election more as a referendum on his rule. The former military commander who overthrew Egypt's first freely elected president, Islamist Mohammed Morsi, has his work cut out for him. His security forces is waging a military campaign in the Sinai Peninsula against locals who feel ignored by Cairo and so-called Islamic State fighters there, who have a fertile arena in which to operate. Also, Sisi must continue to deal with an economy in shambles. But Egypt's neighbors are satisfied with the results. Saudi Arabia, fearful of a rise of the Muslim Brotherhood, threw its financial weight behind Sisi to make sure he won. Israel is also pleased with Sisi's victory. Egypt is one of two Arab states that has signed a peace treaty with Israel. The other is Jordan. Israel sees Sisi as a reliable and trusted ally. Many say this election was supposed to cement Sisi's grip on power. But with the low turnout and many domestic challenges facing his second term, this win may just expose how weak this grip is. Mohammed El Qasim, I-24 News.
Still ahead, the anti-Semitism scandal inside one of Britain's most powerful parties, why one party leader decided to step down. Welcome back to Clear Cut. We have an update on the investigation into the poisoning attack of a former spy on British soil. British officials say it's likely the chemical nerve agent used was smeared on the door handle of the home of Sergei Skripal, sickening him and his daughter. British officials now say it's likely the Kremlin approved the attack. Officials also say that because the chemical was so powerful, it could have only been handled by trained professionals familiar with chemical weapons. Skripal remains in critical condition and unresponsive, and his daughter Yulia reportedly conscious and talking. It's been a week since the protest outside the British Parliament in London claiming anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. And while some of the party's leaders are stepping down over the crisis, its leader, Jeremy Corbyn, is staying put. Senior international affairs correspondent Owen Alterman has the story.
Passover is a time to celebrate a journey from oppression to freedom.
Jeremy Corbyn sending Passover greetings. But his anti-Semitism scandal won't go away. The leader of Britain's Labour Party continues to come under fire for alleged connections with anti-Semites. The latest charge, an investigation by Britain's Sunday Times newspaper showing that senior Corbyn aides were part of numerous Facebook groups with anti-Semitic posts. On Sunday, reports that Corbyn shut down his personal Facebook account. Many have speculated this was because of the ongoing charges. Meanwhile, key Labour figures continue to sound the alarm. Michael Martin, former Speaker of the House of Commons, calling for a party conference on anti-Semitism. Sir David Gerrard, Jewish and once a major Labour donor, saying he's stopped backing the party. All this as Labour official Christine Shawcroft quit the party's executive committee after coming out against suspending a local election candidate accused of Holocaust denial. Corbyn tried to reach out Friday using his Passover video.
We in the Labour movement will never be complacent about anti-Semitism. We all need to do better. I'm committed to ensuring the Labour Party is a welcoming and secure place for Jewish people.
Corbyn is in a hole. British Jews don't trust him. Some senior members of his own party are critical. On the other hand, Corbyn has die-hard grassroots support among Labour members. Some 77% just told pollsters they think anti-Semitism charges are exaggerated in order to block criticism of Israel or to hurt Corbyn. Corbyn has shown in the past that with his grassroots backing, he can survive political trouble. For the man who may be the next Prime Minister of Britain, charges of anti-Semitism may not bring him down. Owen Alterman, I-24 News.
And still ahead here on ClearCut, U.S. stocks take a beating. Fears of a trade war spooking investors. What's next in the fight between the U.S. and China? Plus, a deal that died. It looked like a breakthrough on the standoff over African migrants, while the Prime Minister of Israel says it's off. Those stories and more next. Welcome back to Clear Cut. I'm Tal Henrik in for Michelle McCory. Let's get you caught up on some of the stories making headlines in your Middle East Minute. In Yemen, an airstrike by the Saudi-led coalition killed at least 12 civilians. Doctors and witnesses said several children were among the dead. A coalition spokesman said the airstrike will be investigated. In Afghanistan, an airstrike on a group of Taliban operatives has caused several casualties, including civilians. The strike in the northern province of Kunduz targeted a mosque and a school. A doctor says students and residents are among the dead. The area has been largely under the control of Taliban fighters. In Syria, the army says it discovered a large network of tunnels beneath eastern Ghouta. Some of the tunnels are big enough to fit a car. The last of the rebel groups in Damascus suburbs began leaving Monday. The government bombing campaign in the region was one of the deadliest of the Syrian civil war. And also in Syria, the director of the UN World Food Program visited Raqqa this weekend for the first time since it was retaken from ISIS fighters. He said about 2/3 of the former militant stronghold has been destroyed. City leaders say it will take about $10 million to rebuild it. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he is suspending a deal with the United Nations involving African migrants. The reversal follows an arrangement he announced to send African migrants to Western countries. Now, a short time ago, I spoke to our diplomatic correspondent, Eli Hochenberg, about the developing situation.
So it was supposed to be a very glamorous policy when Netanyahu convened this glamorous press conference earlier in the day to announce really a landmark deal with the United Nations to secure the deportation of thousands of African asylum seekers to Western countries. It was somewhat an unexpected solution, especially taking into consideration the fact that Israel and the United Nations are not such great friends, to say the least. But this deal came to life after a previous governmental plan to deport migrants to a third African country was not only harshly scrutinized, but really encountered many legal complications and sparked much political storm. And I can tell you that I've been speaking to many African diplomats in the past couple of months, and they were very surprised by this massive counter campaign that was, actually quite a smear campaign against those respective country, most notably Rwanda, perhaps. And there was a great sense of frustration on their part. Because they perceived this deal as somewhat of a friendly diplomatic gesture from, again, those African countries to Israel, but then it became very chaotic.
We'll just explain that the canceled agreement would have given thousands of African migrants temporary status in Israel. Now, instead, Netanyahu says he plans to meet with residents of South Tel Aviv, where many of the migrants live. Let's get your business news on a rough day for U.S. stocks. This is a live look at the NASDAQ building here in Times Square. Another tech sell-off drove down the NASDAQ, the index falling 2 3/4%. The Dow was off almost 2%, and the S&P was down 2 1/4%. A big part of the drop, fresh fears over a potential trade war with China. In response to President Trump's tariffs on imported steel and aluminum, the Chinese government has announced its own tariffs on about $3 billion worth of U.S. imports. The Chinese tariffs are on 128 products ranging from meat and fruit to steel pipes. Joining me now on set is Kathy Boyle, CEO of Chapman Hale Advisors. Kathy, so stocks are down sharply following the retaliation from China. Who here in the United States should worry the most about this?
So any investors have been very apathetic, right? So the last decline in February, people are sort of like, oh yeah, let's buy the dip, right? We've had 40 dips since 2009, and every single one, if you bought the dip, you made money. So we call it FOMO, fear of missing out, and BTD, buy the dip. And so that's what's been happening. So many investors are very heavily invested in stocks that have a lot of tech exposure. 3 out of 4 of these top of the FANG stocks are in top hedge funds. So when there starts to be liquidations like today, Amazon was down 5%. Facebook was down another 2 and change. That means it's down about 15, 16% since its peak in January. So those weigh very heavily within the NASDAQ, and tech has been the leader. So investors are doing knee-jerk reactions. So they put $43 billion into funds. The next week they pulled 19 out. Then last week on an up day, we saw a little bit of fund inflow, and now we're seeing more fund outflow.
And I guess those farmers could also probably expect a big impact because most of the items on the Chinese list are agricultural products.
Right. So as far as the tariffs, that's who it's going to hurt American businesses. So one of the Danish banks came out today and said we're expecting Goldilocks, but we should be ready for Frankenstein. So that's the risk, is that these tariffs could hurt the very core group of our economy, of really what is pushing Americans to be stronger.
I'm wondering, where do you personally stand on this? Because President Trump said before that he forced these tariffs because in the name of national security, but China is saying that it's a violation of global trade.
Right. So a global trade war would be very bad. It really would be bad. It'd be the nail in the coffin. We also have inflation concerns. We have rising rates. There's no place to hide right now. Japan saw inflow last week, and they're the last of the QE trades because they're the only big bank that has not announced a tapering of interest rates. So rates are going up. It's going to mean mortgages are going to be more difficult. So we have a lot to think about, a lot to be concerned about, and most people have no hedges. They really don't have any protection, and they're now 10 years older than they were the last time we had a correction.
Oh, wow. How much further do you believe this could deteriorate?
I've been very bearish. We've been wrong so far, but we think that we could see. One economist came out today and said expect 30% decline. So the fact that the S&P broke the 200-day moving average, that's important. It's held that line until now. We're now in correction territory. So if the selling starts to accelerate, you could see it happen very fast. A lot of the big boys have been taking money off the table. So a lot of the trading volume at the end of the day has been happening, a lot of selling between 3 and 4. That's a sign of institutions taking money off. So retail tends to be last. They tend to buy high and sell low.
So who's benefiting from this entire story?
Well, you know, there's always two sides to every market. Somebody's selling and somebody's buying, right? So somebody's always on the losing end, somebody's always on the winning end. But in general, the smarter money is the one that usually takes advantage of these types of moves.
Kathy Boyle, thank you so much for explaining.
Great to be here.
And across the United States, tens of thousands of teachers are staging protests demanding better pay and more school funding. They're also threatening to strike. Correspondent Maggie Rulli has the latest.
A teacher rebellion is gaining momentum across the country.
This is a historic day, and I think what they need to take away is that our students are worth it.
Tens of thousands of educators walking out of the classroom.
We are the future. I mean, our students are the future, and they need to fund our future.
Fighting for more funds, smaller class sizes, and less teacher turnover. In Kentucky, teachers are calling in sick to march against legislation that would reduce their pensions.
And they're literally taking my money out of my pension.
In Oklahoma, so many teachers called out Oklahoma City Public Schools had to cancel classes.
This is a reflection of the people inside that building that have neglected us for a decade.
Oklahoma ranks 49th in teacher pay. And while state lawmakers passed a bill last week to increase teacher salaries by $6,100, many administrators say it does not address the overall lack of funding.
That's the scary part. I mean, are we going to be able to retain talented teachers that we currently have? Are we ever going to be able to recruit talented minds?
And in Arizona last week, frustrated teachers rallied on the state capitol demanding a 20% pay increase.
I can't even afford to have my kids on my health insurance.
And are now threatening to strike.
People do need to act now.
That's Maggie Ruley reporting. Just last month in West Virginia, teachers there went on strike, shutting down schools for 9 days until eventually winning a 5% pay raise. And still ahead here on the program, Mother of a Nation. We look back at the life and legacy of South Africa's Winnie Mandela. And crashing to Earth, we'll tell you what happened to the Chinese space station when it tumbled out of orbit. Welcome back to Clear Cut. The world is remembering the late South African icon, Winnie Mandela. She was the ex-wife of Nelson Mandela, the nation's first democratically elected president. But Winnie Mandela was an anti-apartheid activist and politician in her own right, though her career was later plagued by allegations of corruption and controversy. She was married to Nelson Mandela for 38 years, including the 27 years he was imprisoned. Winnie received a suspended jail sentence herself due to a kidnapping and assault conviction. Still, she is widely remembered as a fighter against South Africa's white minority rule.
She dedicated most of her life to the cause of our people. Mama Winnie Mandela was identified by the masses of our people as the mother of the nation. This was in recognition of her fearless and uncompromising stand that she took against the might of the apartheid regime.
Her family says she passed away at a hospital in Johannesburg after a long illness. Winnie Mandela was 81 years old. And joining me now to talk about the life and legacy of the mother of South Africa is correspondent Paul Tilsley. He's in Johannesburg right now. Paul, you knew Winnie Mandela personally. Can you tell us how you'll remember her?
Well, I was fortunate that both ex-husband Nelson and Winnie both called me by my first name. She was mesmerizing, charismatic to be with, Tal. She became the mother of the nation, her nickname, in the 1960s. She was persecuted when her husband was sent to prison. She spent over a year, 451 days, actually 18 months in solitary confinement. She was tortured, separated from her children, yet battled for freedom while her husband was imprisoned. Tal?
How would you describe her from your personal interaction with her?
Well, Winnie was always there for the poorest of the poor. If there was a shack fire where people in informal settlements lost everything, you had to know as a journalist to get there quickly, because Winnie would be the first public figure to get there, normally before the other television cameras. She didn't do it for the cameras. She did it for the people. She just stood there and gave comfort. In interviews with me, though, Tal, she was always quick to make a little joke. She was always positive. She found the best out of the worst situations before we got down to business. She had a magical presence. Her passion filled the room you were in. And she could never be accused of being modest. I remember fondly once I was filming in Soweto, something totally different. And this large motorcade stopped, and the security, one of the guards got out of the car and came across to me and motioned that I should go across to the limousine. The dark windows at the back came down, and there was a beaming Winnie Mandela who said, "Paul, why are you filming this stuff? Come and film me. It's much more interesting."
What a sense of humor. A special person indeed. And Paul, tell us a little bit about her marriage to Nelson Mandela and her sometimes continuous relationship with the people of South Africa.
Yeah, indeed, she was loved by the people of South Africa, and she was undoubtedly the love of Nelson Mandela's life. But she was no saint. She openly had an affair in the final years of Nelson's imprisonment, and he got to hear about it in prison. It reportedly broke his heart, Tal, and as soon as he could, when he was released, he divorced her. But it said he never got over her. Even when he married Graça Machel, Winnie and Nelson never broke a special spiritual bond. For weeks, I stood with my crew outside the hospital where Nelson spent much of his final days. Graça visited occasionally. Nelson couldn't talk and drifted in and out of consciousness. But despite that, Winnie came to sit beside his bed, holding his hand every single day. I saw her car go in, I saw it go out. And controversially, on the night he died, it was Winnie, Tal, who was at his side. She loved him till his final moment. And tonight there are still crowds outside her home near to here in Soweto. The nation of South Africa, Tal, loved her.
The name Winnie Mandela will go down in history, Paul. How do you think she will be remembered?
That's a great question, Tal. As the real deal. She was imprisoned, she was tortured, but always got back up and shouted Amandla, basically her statement calling for freedom in South Africa's darkest days. She didn't flee into comfortable political exile like many here. She just wouldn't shut up. She was the ultimate freedom fighter. Tonight, South Africa is united in giving thanks, Tal, because truly, this nation is in her debt.
Can you tell us a bit about the reactions you're seeing there, maybe on social media? How are people reacting to her death? And are there any kind of special events that are supposed to take place in the coming days commemorating her and her legacy?
Yeah, her memorial, the first of many, will be on the 11th of April. Things take a while to get organized. Many world leaders are going to come, and probably many past world leaders as well. And then she's also going to have a funeral on the 14th. I'm just scrolling through my Instagram here. Her granddaughter just released this photo. I don't know if I hope you'll be able to see it there.
Isn't that gorgeous? It is gorgeous.
That's her granddaughter's personal photo of her and Nelson Mandela. She's loved this woman.
Paul Tilsley, thank you for sharing these personal memories and insights. And still ahead, no deal. President Trump blames Democrats for failing to protect the so-called dreamers. And pop diplomacy. South Korean K-pop artists perform in the North with a very famous face in the audience. While the White House celebrated the 140th annual Easter egg roll this weekend, President Trump was on Twitter blasting Democrats for stalling a deal on DACA to protect hundreds of thousands of dreamers from deportation. Correspondent Serena Marshall has the latest from Washington.
Children surrounding him, the Easter Bunny on hand, President Trump celebrating Easter at the White House with a message for dreamers.
They had this great opportunity. The Democrats have really let them down. It's a shame. And now people are taking advantage of DACA, and that's a shame.
But before greeting visitors for the 140th egg roll, Mr. Trump was on Twitter, writing about caravans of people traveling through Mexico and calling on Congress to act. He claimed DACA is dead because of Democrats, and now everyone wants to get onto the DACA bandwagon. But the president was the one who ended DACA, the program for undocumented children brought to the U.S., and he is the one who rejected a Democratic deal that would have fully funded his $25 billion border wall in exchange for a pathway to citizenship for dreamers. During that bipartisan meeting earlier this year, the president said any deal should be one of love.
If they come to me with things that I'm not in love with, I'm going to do it.
But when the Senate came close, he threatened a veto. The Twitter tirade began on Easter, about an hour after this Fox and Friends segment about migrants traveling north from Central America.
Because they're breaking Mexican laws as well.
The semi-annual protest march takes those seeking political asylum to an official U.S. border entry point, and none of them would qualify for DACA, as applicants must have been brought to the U.S. before they turned 16 and have been living here since 2007. Those tweets reiterated as he walked into Easter service.
That was Serena Marshall reporting. And as we wrap up the show, let's take a look at some headlines from around the globe in our World Wrap. In Fiji, a tropical cyclone is blamed for the deaths of at least 4 people. Flooding brought torrential rain over the weekend to the Pacific island nation. The northwestern town of Ba on Fiji's largest island is said to be the worst hit. In Bolivia, a powerful 6.8 magnitude earthquake shook the country. Television images showed workers leaving office buildings, some standing in the rain with umbrellas. The quake was so deep inside the earth, there was no serious damage or injuries reported. China's first space lab, dubbed the Tiangong-1, is now nothing more than space dust. The lab burned up as it re-entered Earth's atmosphere early Monday over the Pacific Ocean. During its short 7-year run in space, the lab tested rendezvous technology and docking between spacecraft while working to build a future space station. And North Korea's Kim Jong-un apparently likes K-pop. State-run television released this footage of Kim watching the South Korean singers perform in the North for the first time in more than a decade. It's another sign that decade-old tensions between North and South are subsiding. Israel's 70th Independence Day festivities could have a different feel than in past years. The organizers say they want to change the rigid structure and shake up a few key traditions, but they could be in for a fight. I-24 News culture correspondent Daniel Campos has the story.
The song has been chosen and the celebration is about to kick off. Every year, on the evening of Independence Day, an official ceremony is held on Mount Herzl, Jerusalem. This ceremony includes a speech by the Speaker of the Israeli Parliament, artistic performances, and the ceremonial lighting of 12 torches symbolizing the 12 tribes of Israel, by special nominated guests who made a significant social contribution to society in a specific area. But so far, preparations are not going smoothly. Minister of Culture Miri Regev is in charge of the festivities. Regev is famous for her outspoken views calling for budget cuts and boycotts of films, theaters, and artists which don't conform to the agenda of the ruling coalition. Now she's sparked another controversy. She wants to change what many see as a hallowed tradition concerning the nature of the ceremony. Traditionally, the only speech made at the ceremony is by the Speaker of the Knesset, Israel's parliament, to emphasize the ceremony's non-political nature. But Regev wants Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Reuven Rivlin to speak as well.
The torch lighting ceremony was always the government's and not the Knesset's. I'm responsible for everything about it, its success or, God forbid, its failure. I authorized the plan. No one else has a say. The Knesset is not a partner in the torch lighting ceremony.
Last week, Parliament Speaker Yuli Edelstein sent a letter to all 120 Parliament members, saying that he will not attend the ceremony if Regev's proposal is adopted. President Rivlin has not yet confirmed his participation nor expressed his full opinion on the issue. Regev is unmoved.
Who does it bother that once in 70 years, the President, the Prime Minister, and Knesset Speaker will speak at the torch lighting ceremony?
According to Ynet News, Edelstein said in closed conversations on Sunday that he won't back down. His view is that he is fighting for the honor of Parliament as an institution and the honor of Israeli citizens who are represented by it. Last month, Parliament member Stav Shafir from the Labour Party called on Regev to remove herself from the music video of Alleluia, celebrating 70 years of independence. Regev refused and denied using the music video to promote herself. According to Regev, she has the right to interfere in decisions regarding the content of the celebration. The question remains, will the Independence Day torch lighting ceremony belong to Parliament or to the government? We will be likely to know the answer on April 18th. Daniel Campos, I-24 News.
And we will continue to follow until April 14th, right? And finally tonight, a Russian delivery drone program got off to a rough start. Ouch. Everyone was really excited to see the drone get off the ground in the Siberian city of Ulan-Ude, but the short delivery flight to a neighboring village just wasn't meant to be. The drone lifted off from a small launch pad and buzzed through the air for several seconds before losing altitude and crashing into a 3-story residential building. No one was hurt, but the drone was left in pieces on the ground. And that is Clear Cut. We would love to hear your comments. You can engage in our conversation on Facebook and Twitter. Thank you for watching.